Welcome to Divine Justice. On the war fronts of Ukraine and Russia, the violent storm did not stop even in the first seconds of 2023. In the first minutes of the new year, enthusiasm prevailed in many countries around the world, but with one exception. From the first minutes of January 1, 2023, the center of the most violent clashes became the Donbas region once again. The Russians had begun to withdraw from this front line a few days before the new year, but the war fronts in the eastern regions of Ukraine still remain active. The Ukrainian armed forces has increased its repression operations on the eastern front and is especially focused on the Donbas these days. This situation began to disrupt all the New Year plans of the invading Russian army. Now, without wasting any time, let's dive into the fiery front lines of war. When the date showed 31st of December 2022 at around 11:50 at night, the Ukrainian army determined the command centers and operational preparation areas of the invading troops in the Luhansk region. In this region, the Moscow army was planning an offensive operation minutes before the new year. Among the central cities of the Russian operation were Stelmakivka, Ploshchanka, and Bilohorivka. Taking action with the fall of the night, the Russian troops entered the Stelmakivka border and started airstrikes against the civilian population in this region and the military resources of the Ukrainian army. Between the same hours, the Russians also took action in the Soledar, Bakhmut, and Ozaryanivka regions in the Donetsk region. Russian missiles mainly targeted Soledar. The clashes in the city were repelled by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. The units of the Kiev army, which were previously deployed in strategic centers, neutralized the Russian forces trying to infiltrate this region with a very striking night operation. Russian warplanes, which provided air support to the conflict, were trying to bombard civilian Ukrainian targets at the same time. However, the Russian troops, who had to retreat as a result of the strong resistance and effective counterattacks of the Ukrainian army in Soledar and Bakhmutska, fled towards the forested land in these two cities. According to local residents, an explosion sounded on the route that the invading troops were advancing while trying to lose track of them in the darkness of the night. However, no information was available about the details of the incident. Estimates were that the Russian soldiers escaping towards the forested terrain in Soledar detonated their own ammunition. Trying to distract the Ukrainian forces in this way, the Russian soldiers somehow lost themselves and escaped. Now we are going to the city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region, which was the focal center of the war. When you first look at the city, you can see that the black smoke still does not pass in the sky. In the city of Bakhmut, where perhaps the most violent and striking clashes of the Ukrainian-Russian war to date took place, Russian troops are now clearly inclined to retreat and flee from the battlefields in this region. Last week, Russian troops attempted to launch a major attack on Bakhmut, and the invading troops even advanced towards the city center. However, the Ukrainian army repulsed the Russians by sending HIMARS troops, Azov Regiment, and the most elite troops to the region. As of today, Russian troops had to retreat 10 kilometers from the front line a week ago. Thousands of Russian invaders were destroyed in the process. Many of them were Wagner band members or Kadyrov's Chechen Kadyrov soldiers. Currently, Ukraine continues its two-day offensive operations from the northeast and southeast directions of Bakhmut. Troops of the Moscow army in Donetsk have already begun to leave the eastern fronts of Ukraine, especially Donetsk. Among the main reasons for this shock retreat are the heavy defeats of the Russians in Bakhmut and the depletion of military resources. The Kiev army, on the other hand, is trying to consolidate the defense lines in this region, while trying to heal the wounds of Bakhmut, which has become a completely war city. Yesterday, information came that additional forces of the Kiev army were moving towards the south of the city of Bakhmut. Especially in the last month of 2022, the center of the battle in Bakhmut had shifted to the south of the city. The Ukrainian armed forces succeeded in clearing this area to a large extent from invading troops. Russian troops carried out attacks against civilian targets in the settlements of Marinka and Pobieda in the Donetsk region. The residents of these two cities who entered the new year with the sounds of guns and missiles had a fearful night. In Marinka, in the first minutes of January 1, 2023, between 12:15 and 1:15 a.m., Russia intensified its air operations and missile attacks. While the sound of warplanes made the residents uneasy, the fears were not met. and the number of dead or injured as a result of the attacks of the invaders in Marinka was not specified. The defeats received by Russia throughout the Donetsk region have now facilitated the future preparation plans of the Ukrainian forces in these regions, because Russia has been carrying out intensive work in Donetsk Oblast since December. Russian leader Vladimir Putin wanted Bakhmut very much and aimed to take control of Donetsk and concentrate entirely on Luhansk. But things did not go as Putin planned, and the soldiers of the occupying Moscow army still continue to leave Donetsk. On the Ukrainian fronts where tension and violence are constantly rising, we are now going to Luhansk again. Because in the first hours of the new year, the last attacks in this region were carried out in the city of Belovodsk. Russia used its chance in and around Belovodsk for the victory Ukraine wanted to achieve on the eastern front line. But on January 1st, the military armored and medical personnel of the Russian soldiers, who were on their way to the central hospital of this city, brought hundreds of casualties to the hospital. According to allegations, many Russian soldiers who were injured after the conflict in the city withdrew from this region and tried to send them to the hospital in order to save their comrades. Including these Russian soldiers who were taken to the Belovodsk hospital, about 450 soldiers of the Moscow army were taken to this hospital in the Luhansk region in the last week. As for the injured, the latest situation is unknown. Now we are going to Makiivka in the Donetsk Oblast. In this region, we see that the violence of the war has decreased a little more. The Russian army has been quite concentrated in Makiivka for the past few days. But Putin's troops could not cross the defense line of Ukraine in this region and began to withdraw from the border line due to the great obstacles created by the ammunition stockpile. We are now transitioning to the activity experienced in the direction of the Caspian Sea. Before the new year, that is, on December 31st, the Russian army attacked Ukraine using the Iskander-M ground-based operational and tactical launchers, as well as aircraft carrying Tu-95 MS strategic missiles from the Caspian Sea. According to preliminary data, in total about 20 missiles were launched. Many of them never reached Ukraine and fell into the territory of the Russian Federation. Although Russia strives to invade Ukraine from everywhere, the incredible resistance and counterattacks of the Kiev army constantly frustrate the efforts of the Moscow army. Even in the new year, Russia, which desperately attacked the territory of Ukraine, is actually having a difficult time in terms of ammunition stockpile. But if we continue to look at the war fronts, the Russian administration continues its attacks on Ukrainian soil in order to hide this difficult process of its army. The Kiev army, on the other hand, has become quite adept at responding to the attacks of both the defender and the invading Russian army. Ukraine's air defense forces and troops destroyed 12 Russian cruise missiles in areas such as Kiev, Zhytomyr, and Khmelnytsky. In the Kiev region, during the missile attack, Russia's Orlan-10 unmanned aerial vehicle, which was conducting aerial reconnaissance to reveal Ukraine's air defense system positions, was shot down by Ukrainian air defense systems. In addition, on January 1st, Russian troops opened fire on civilian infrastructure and residents of the Kherson region, with multiple launch rocket systems 12 times. Fortunately, there were no reports of casualties by the Russian army after these brutal civilian attacks. We have seen in Kherson that Russia's non-combat tactics against civilian targets continue in the new year. The Moscow administration, which tried every way to win the war, continues to achieve heavy results despite all these efforts. Now we share the year-end updated evaluation report with you. By the end of 2022, Ukrainian defense forces had liberated almost 50% of the territory occupied by Russia from February 24th to the end of this year. The liberation of the Kherson region on the right bank increased the total area of the territories retaken from the invading Russian troops to almost 40,000 square kilometers. In recent days, an area of 12,000 square kilometers was liberated in the offensive operation carried out by Ukrainian forces in the Kharkiv region. In addition, 500 settlements in this region were completely cleared of Russian invaders by the Ukrainian forces, and repair work was started. If the counterattacks and strong resistance of the Kiev army continue in this way in the new year, it will be inevitable for the war to turn towards Ukraine. At the moment, the battlefronts are still active and full of tension, as we mentioned. We will be with you again with the events taking place on the front line in the following processes. Thank you for watching us.